And this meeting is being recorded. Stop the recording.
Very much. Okay, so these fabulous ambassadors from the World Without Exploitation Youth Coalition are joining us from the future. It is 9 p.m. for them. Thank you so much for being up a little late to present to us. I'd also like to introduce you to our friend Yasmin Donar, who just joined us. She's also in Santiago, so welcome, Yas. So without further ado, I'd like to give you as much time as possible to share your work and your advocacy and your vision. So girls, the floor is yours. Thank you for being in Oregon with us.
Thank you. So do I have permission to share screen? Perfect. You do. So I'm just going to share my screen and then get us started. So while I'm doing that, my name is Caitlin Macias, and I am the chair of the World Without Exploitation Youth Coalition. I'm a master's student at Columbia University studying social work, and I've been doing this work since I was 16 years old when I founded a feminist club at my school. And so gender-based violence and gender justice is a huge part of my life. And so I'm really excited today to speak to you all about this particular topic. Just let me let this load quickly. So a little bit about us. So we are the World Without Exploitation Youth Coalition, and we are a national network of young people dedicated to combating human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And we actually have a really interesting story because we came about during COVID-19 in 2020. And we were founded on this idea that young people need to be at the helm of creating policy and also creating social change around human trafficking and sexual exploitation. So we mainly work on advocacy campaigns and different kinds of things online related to educating people about these types of issues. And we have our annual youth summit, which I'm so excited that this year is actually going to be in person in New York City. So these are just a few photos of us. This is how we started, basically on Zoom, and then we've had the opportunity to have other kinds of events. And yeah, we're super excited to be here. And I am joined by Willow Locke and Erin Regan, and I'll just let them introduce themselves, and then we can get started to talk about Sarah's Law.
Hi, I'm Willow Locke. I'm a high school student from Brooklyn, New York, and I am the outreach coordinator for World We Youth, and I'm super excited to be here today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Regan. I am actually an educator. I work with high school students, and I've been working with high school students for several years in DC, New York, and most recently Boston. I currently live in Boston, but I came to this work after working with students in New York who were actually really affected by commercial sexual exploitation. So I came to the coalition as a way to advocate for them. And I'm really excited for this presentation. I spent a little bit of time in Eugene after college, and I absolutely loved it. So it's just really nice to be back among great people.
Thank you, Erin. So this brings us to our first slide of our presentation, and I'll let Willow take it away.
So happening all across the country, impacting our most vulnerable populations, is the global sex trade, which is an on and offline multi-billion-dollar industry. Every dollar of profit is fueled by human pain, and sex trafficking in particular is a form of exploitation where people are bought and sold for pleasure and profit, utilizing force, fraud, and coercion, and abuse of power / position of vulnerability. So I believe Caitlin and Erin will get more into this soon, but our most vulnerable populations are young girls of color and women from low-income households. So the sex trade, although it can feel really something that we're not disconnected to, especially those of us with privilege, it really does happen all around us, where we live, where we don't live. It really is everywhere.
I know that there's a pretty good foundational understanding too of trafficking here. So we'll dive kind of into Sarah's Law in a second, but just to kind of reiterate what Willow said, I think it's really important to just name that trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. And I actually, even in my work with the coalition over the past 2 years, calling it sexual exploitation for me actually just really kind of rings true in the sense that trafficking and exploitation, they're really one and the same. And it is so insidious in our culture. And I think that this idea of trafficking sometimes evokes an image of, someone being snatched off the street, like the movie Taken from with Liam Neeson, and just kind of like this thing that happens in isolation, when in reality, like we live in a culture of commodification where, especially young women and girls, there is a price put on their sexuality and their body, and profit is very high and the risk is very low, especially with social media and technology. Commercial sexual exploitation is just like any business, and I think that that's really just important to name. There is a supply and there's demand, and the supply, we have seen through a lot of data, is that the supply is typically young women and girls of color who are living in poverty. And that was my experience as a teacher. A lot of my students would come to me and show me, messages that they got on social media. They would talk to me about relationships that they had in their own lives, often with much older men. And no one necessarily immediately would have identified it as trafficking. But if you just peeled back the layers, you easily would have been able to see just the disgusting amount of exploitation that was happening. And it was fueled by this demand. The demand for commercial sex is very high. It is fueled by a lot of different things. The porn industry is a really big part of it. But I think it's just important to note that as we kind of go into Sarah's law, that there's this power dynamic of the buyer and the seller, and the quote seller, and that they're not on an equal playing field, the buyer and the seller. And we typically see the people who are purchasing women and girls are men most of the time, around 50 years old, white, and upper middle class. The average age of entry into commercial sexual exploitation is 13 years old, which is obviously beyond horrifying, younger than my high school students. And this is the average age. So, there's definitely, there's intention behind this. There's this kind of higher price and desire for younger women and girls and younger bodies. And that has become very evident, I think, in a couple different ways. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Jeffrey Epstein, the Maxwell trial that, she was just found guilty in December of 5 of 6 accounts. And that trial in this case has really evoked a lot of national attention, and rightly so. But it's really brought to light just how young a lot of the girls were who were exploited by, grown adult people. And Sarah Cruzan, who we're going to talk about now, was similar, in a similar situation to the girls who were exploited by Epstein and Maxwell. I don't know if you want to go to the next slide, Caitlin. So Sarah Cruzan is an incredible survivor who we've really been fortunate enough to work with. But Sarah was in the same position as a lot of the girls that we've seen exploited by, again, Epstein and Maxwell. And Sarah was 11 years old when she started to be groomed by her trafficker. He was a family friend named Gigi. She very affectionately had referred to him as Gigi. They had a relationship. Sarah was raised by a single mom. Things were fairly, I think, chaotic, and she developed this relationship. She started to be groomed, and she was eventually coerced into prostitution by this man, Gigi. Her life ensued in the way that a lot of survivors' lives ensues, a lot of physical, psychological manipulation. And so from 11 to 16, she was, again, coerced into prostitution and trafficked by Gigi. And then when she was 16, she actually shot and killed Gigi. And she was sentenced to life in prison at 16 years old. And none of the abuse or trauma was permitted to be used in court. And it was actually after 20 years of tireless advocacy by different human rights groups that Sarah was commuted by Governor Schwarzenegger in California, and she was released. And she has she's incredible, obviously, and has just done a lot of work really around kind of amending our ideas about self-defense and self-defense laws and youth in the juvenile justice system. So Sarah, I mean, Caitlin now is going to talk a little bit more about the details regarding Sarah's law.
Right. And just like to talk a little bit more about Sarah, like we've actually worked with her on this campaign for Sarah's Law, and she's, been part of curating 2 op-eds, one of them which was released in Wisconsin, and one of them which we're going to have released actually next month in Marie Claire. And so we just wanted to say, like, Sarah has been a huge part of our advocacy work. And, Sarah is actually not alone. There's so many children who are actually sentenced to these really long sentences in adult court, so not juvenile court. And they face, life in prison for crimes that they've committed when in fact they were maybe under, duress while they committed these crimes, and their trauma is not being taken into consideration. So effectively, Sarah's Law would actually allow these child victims of trauma, of abuse, of trafficking to obtain lesser sentences. So allowing judges the discretion to actually look at this person holistically and think, hey, Sarah has been through so much. She has been groomed since the age of 11. She had this horrible, experience in her family. What she needs are services, mental health services, medical services, instead of this hefty sentence where she's going to spend all these years in jail and then be released and not even have ever received care. And Sarah's Law has actually been introduced into 2 bills which are in Congress. So at the national and federal level, one of them is the Trafficking Victims Reauthorization and Protection Act. And that actually is a larger called an omnibus bill that includes other legislation. And then the other one is a smaller bill pioneered by Congressman Westerman. And I know Heather actually attended that event. And Congressman Westerman actually met Sarah and, really fell in love with her story and her outlook. And that actually includes also legislation that would get rid of life without parole for children. And so, we're just really passionate about this because this affects, our own people, and specifically women and girls of color. We worked on another case where a young girl, she was being trafficked by her boyfriend, and then the trafficker / boyfriend actually shot and killed someone, and she is actually being tried for capital murder as an adult. And so this is not just one isolated case of Sarah. These are tons of children, mostly of color, that are actually being unnecessarily criminalized by our very own quote unquote justice system.
So there are a couple of different reasons why child victims are unnecessarily criminalized. The first one being that self-defense laws don't usually protect these victims. It's super common for people who have been exploited to retaliate against their exploiter after the time period of when they were being trafficked or exploited. So obviously the self-defense law wouldn't really apply to that. Another thing is lack of resources, which Caitlin had kind of touched on, but not having a lot of money, coming from backgrounds. If you're coming from a background where you don't have a lot of money, and majority of survivors are people of color, and there is a much bigger focus on prosecuting and criminalizing those who sell sex instead of buyers and exploiters. We see many arrests of people who have been prostituted and not as many of the people actually buying the sex. So yeah, those are just a few reasons. And then I think I'm going to pass it on to Caitlin to talk about our week of action.
Sure. So we actually work with Sarah and with a lot of different groups, Shared Hope, ECPAT USA, Nicosi, to create this week of action, which we had just a few months ago. And basically we were trying to engage and educate audiences about Sarah's Law and urge people to contact their legislators for the legislators to actually co-sponsor on the bills. And we did that through a lot of different means, through social media. We held an event, and then we did some Twitter activism as well. And so I'll hand it off to Willow and she'll just walk us through some of the things that you can do right now. And I'm just gonna unshare my screen so that we can discuss that.
Yeah, so if you are interested in getting involved, which we really hope you are, there are a bunch of different ways to do that. All of them are fairly simple. So one of them is tell a friend about Sarah's Law, give them a call, send them an email, tell them about this presentation. If you felt connected to it, post on social media, use the hashtag Pass Sarah's Law and hashtag Kids Aren't Criminals. I think Caitlin's going to put all of this in the chat as well. Contact your legislator. This is a really important one, and something that is also fairly easy to do. Sign there, and then we're also going to put links to petitions you can sign to support Sarah's Law and prevent the Unfair Sentencing Act. And then we are also going to provide links in the chat to look up your legislator by address, legislator list and Twitter handles, and as well as an email and phone script. And we will also put our contact information in the chat. So if you have any questions or want to reach out to us, we'd love to hear from you.
And while I'm doing that, I will hand it back to Erin and she will just close us out and, you know, we'll open it up for some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin. I don't have a ton to add. It was kind of a short pitch about, you know, our work with Sarah, how the Sarah's Law campaign kind of became, you know, something that we were very passionate about, but, you know, we're kind of in the middle of it now. We're hoping it's going to be introduced soon. But yeah, thank you for listening and excited for, you know, further conversation and, you know, helping us to move this campaign forward. We're very appreciative of your time and listening.
Heather, I don't know if we have some time for some questions, but yeah, we'd love to hear any that you have. I'm trying to get these links to work. But while I do that, you know, just open it up to any questions.
And I'll get those links into like our newsletter or some way out to the whole club.
Thank you, Holly. President to be, are we open for questions?
We are open for questions. We've got 10 to 15 minutes, depending on how many questions there are. So please go ahead.
Looks-
Can I ask a question? Is this a state legislature you're talking about or federal when you're talking about Sarah's Law?
Sure. So this is actually federal. So it's been introduced into the House, both of them, and then we're actually waiting for it to be introduced into the Senate. So the hope is that this, you know, passes at the federal level, but then states take the initiative and actually pass it in their own states as well. So, you know, it's a long road and Sarah has already been working on this for many, many years. But we see this, you know, it's not very controversial because most people can agree that, you know, child victims should actually receive, you know, care and not these long sentences. So we see, you know, a bright future for Sarah's Law.
I have a question and also a comment. I know the the ILO, the International Labor Organization of the UN, labels this as the worst forms of child labor. And that includes sexual exploitation, as well as getting young people involved in criminalized kinds of activities, of course, with no fault of their own. And so I was wondering, do you have, you know, any like champions for Sarah's Law from the International Labor Organization?
I don't think that we do. We'd love to connect with anybody that you have, you know, any contacts. You know, we've mostly just been working with anti-trafficking organizations and actually some juvenile justice organizations, but we're trying to get, you know, more people interested and involved, especially once it gets introduced into the Senate. But yeah, you know, we have our email in the chat, and I'll also put my personal one. If you have someone who you think might be interested, we'd love to connect with them.
That would be great, Caitlin. I would be interested in seeing what I could connect you with on the international level with the ILO.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
We also too, just to add just a small thing and not to dwell too much on this, because I think it would be a separate meeting, but just our work, yeah, we completely agree with what you just said, Lisa. And there is sometimes this misunderstanding that, you know, when like the sex trade is fully decriminalized in, you know, for adults, that, you know, the youth aren't harmed by that. And we've actually seen that, like, as the sex trade is fully decriminalized in a lot of different countries like New Zealand, it actually really affects young people too. It's like this really big growing problem. And sometimes it's easy to compartmentalize and think that, you know, full decriminalization actually is good. And we've seen it really harm the young people that we work with. So just wanted to add that.
Great.
Yeah. And just to add that full decriminalization of the sex trade means that people that are selling, you know, are fully decriminalized, not arrested, not charged, but also that would decriminalize the exploiters. So like pimps, brothel owners, and sex buyers wouldn't be arrested and they wouldn't be held accountable. But I think there's a lot of people with questions. Dale?
Yes. I think I understand that your focus is primarily helping with the legal issues, but as you find these children and young women before they get into the criminal system, do you have resources to refer them to for proper medical care, mental health support, getting them back in school, helping them deal with all of these issues?
Yeah, I think that you bring up a really good point. And that's, you know, we also have other legislation that we're advocating for, which would be exit strategies and comprehensive services. So this is just a small piece of getting these sentences reduced, but I definitely agree. In one of the bills, actually, there's provisions to move these cases to family court and to juvenile court so that they could actually access some of those services. But it's honestly not as robust as it could be, specifically for these children that have experienced so much trauma. So yeah, I definitely agree that we need more, you know, specifically funding, because those services cost a lot of money. Ray?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you're muted.
We'll do, sorry to jump in, we'll do
There we
Ray,
go.
go on mute, and then James.
Okay, so my question is, does Sarah's law only focus on minors? And what happens, do young adults who also are trafficking victims, would they be protected by Sarah's law?
I don't think so, because it's a focus on children. So a child is defined as someone under the age of 18.
Right.
And so then they would fall under the adult side. So Sarah's law wouldn't necessarily protect them, but they would be protected under, you know, adult trafficking laws, but they're, you know, not as robust as they could be, and trafficking laws vary state by state. So unfortunately, a lot of the times, you know, these women do end up getting arrested. And sometimes when women are trafficked, or when people are trafficked, they don't even know that they're trafficked. You know, they don't really understand what's happening to them, sometimes for many, many years. And so it's really hard sometimes to get them services and have them exit, because, you know, they sometimes have such a, you know, robust trauma bond with their groomers and with their traffickers that they don't even know what's happening to them. So the short answer is Sarah's law would not cover it, but there are other laws in our system that would hopefully help this person that is a young adult.
Hi, when I hear about sexual exploitation of the young ones, most of the stories I hear and the work is done on young girls. And we all know that young boys also face the same exploitation in many ways. I have two questions. One, how much work are you guys doing on the young boys as far as sexual exploitation is concerned, and how to prevent it? Number two, when we hear about the same struggle you guys are doing and other people, the focus is always those who have been exploited, and when they are like being rehabilitated. But we all know that those people, before they get into those situations, they have their like own situations, like in schools, whereby some work might be done for prevention instead of treating. How much presence do you have in educating the young in high schools, and how much do you go there? How is your services in those areas?
Sure, I can take it, and then Erin can probably answer. So we are doing some work. We've held some events on masculinity and trying to attract more conversations with men and boys. And we do actually have a few members of our coalition that are young men, and they come from a variety of backgrounds as well. And so I do agree this conversation needs to be had with young men who both might become exploiters and also might be exploited as well. And on the second piece, we do work to educate, high school students, like our annual youth summit. I'm actually doing a 5-week program with a local foster care organization, educating foster care youth about sex trafficking. And what you might not know is that foster care children in the child welfare system are often very, very vulnerable to being trafficked because they don't have a consistent family life, and they also might have already experienced, trauma and abuse. So we are doing programs to try to get on the front end. So it's everything. It's like on the front end, educating people, but then also on the back end, I'm trying to get people out and trying to get them legal, medical, and mental health services. So I do agree, prevention is the key. And maybe Erin, if you want to add anything to that.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I came to this work as an educator, and because I do believe that education is the best prevention, I think that if we had a really, really, really robust prevention services in this country, we would see this issue a lot differently. And what I think that would look like is all educators, all people who are working with young people, including, social workers, including school psychologists, administrative teams, for them to have a really robust training on what this looks like, what to look out for victims. Because again, kind of like what I was saying at the beginning of my presentation is, I think a huge problem with sexual exploitation is us misunderstanding really what it is and not understanding how pervasive it is. As of right now, I'm just going one classroom at a time, but the Youth Coalition is ambitious, so hopefully we can do more in the future. Right now, I actually am partnering with an organization in Boston called My Life, My Choice. That's an incredible organization that does a lot of prevention. They train social workers and educators in a prevention curriculum for then educators and social workers to do this 10-week curriculum at their educational institutions. So that's what I'm hoping to do this. I work with mostly female students. And so basically having this 10-week prevention curriculum with them, I'll be able to do that. So.
For sure. And then we're also doing it at the college level. So our organization has this program called College Delegates, where we're starting chapters of our youth coalition in colleges across the country, and also doing some, side college events as well. I'm actually traveling to Arizona this month to do a college program there to talk about sex trafficking as well. And so, our college students are also really vulnerable, specifically to, falling victims to sugar daddies who say that they're going to pay for their tuition, but actually end up trafficking them. So yeah, I think, we're doing a lot of education, prevention, and honestly, a lot of legal work as well, because if the laws aren't changed, you're not going to see consistent, change in our communities. So if there's any other questions, we'd love to answer them, but you guys are a fantastic group. Very impressed.
Do we
Heather.
have questions, Heather?
I was remiss in not drawing your attention to something earlier, and I'm sure that the work that you do takes an emotional and psychological toll. I'm grateful that you're doing all the advocacy that you are, but I'm sure there are days that it hurts, right? And there are so many folks that are also doing this work. And I should have mentioned earlier, Claire Little, who is on this call, was instrumental in bringing anti-human trafficking awareness to the coast, which is primarily small rural communities. And they actually got that curriculum included in the school systems in Lincoln County. So I think there are victories happening all over the place, and we're grateful for those. And all of these, you know, it's the school of small fish working together. So I'm sorry that I didn't mention Claire's work earlier, but that's a small rural community with a lot of vulnerability. So all of these things are coalescing, and hopefully we're heading the right direction.
For sure. Yeah, that's amazing. And every person, that's what we always say about our young people. Everyone comes with different talents. Erin's a high school teacher. We have high school students, we have college students. Some of us do social media, some of us do video editing. Other people are really good at writing emails. So, you know, there's a place for everybody in this movement. And also, you know, we work with people of all ages as well. You know, our World Without Exploitation, we have people who, you know, are in their 50s as well. So I think this issue touches, you know, particularly young people, but I think anybody can be an advocate. So I'm just really glad that you guys are open to listening to this conversation and contributing.
Okay, well, Caitlin, Erin, and Willow, thank you so much for joining our meeting tonight. The work you do is more than important, and we can only give you a round of applause for what you're doing. So at this point, we're going to move on to club business. You're all welcome to stay and watch that if you'd like, but I know you're in different time zones than we are. So if you'd like to exit, that is perfectly all right as well. So, and again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, Lisa, I'm going to turn the program over to you. We have an induction tonight.